week 8 of the Mount Silver Mystery Egg Division. My name is Scribbles, I'm coach of the Colorado Cabalions, and this weekend we're up against the Arizona Chardinals, coached by Orizan. Kind of going into the team builder, I did a quick look over his team. He's got a lot of offensive threats. He's got physical setup in the form of Marshadow, Altaria, and Scizor. Also has setup options with Thundurus on the special side. And then he's got a lot of really good walls. Alamomola and Hippowdon on the physical side are really tough to break, and Goodra on the special side can be really tough to break. Its typing ends up being somewhat of a liability against me because I have pretty good options for fairy damage output, and then I also have some decent options for basically just heavy physical damage. So Goodra's a bit tough. You can see my prediction for the mons I think he would bring. I think the first 4 are pretty much guaranteed. I think Marshadow's coming. Marshadow's come every match. I don't think there's any reason that they would stop now. It has a good speed tier. It's not great against my team, which is interesting. Hippowdon is an amazing rocker. I think against my team with no grass type and my water types not being the most offensive, I think you bring Hippowdon for sure. Thundurus threatens a lot of my team. Nidoking threatens a lot of my team with his coverage. Altaria and Scizor, I was a little bit more on the fence about. Altaria can do a lot of different things for his team, so I thought it was pretty good, and Scizor gives him some pivoting. You know, he could form Volt Turn Core with Thundurus, so that's my prediction. Really, the first 4 I was pretty sure about, and after that, I think he could bring basically anything. I don't think Honchkrow has a good matchup, but everything else on the team, I don't think he's bringing Wartortle, but I think everything else on the team is really good. So going into the team builder, I ended up with, I think, one of my most interesting teams. This would not have been what I anticipated building. We'll start with Yondu here, the Quagsire. Most of his physical or his kind of sweeping threats are physical setup. You've got Marshadow with like Bulk Up, Mega Altaria, Dragon Dance, Scizor with Swords Dance. So this is kind of the first week where I felt pretty confident bringing Quagsire. I talked to Brian a little bit about Quagsire over the course of the last week. And, you know, maybe they talked me into it being decent. I think it's probably way better in a non-Ubers format where the damage output isn't quite so high. But in this case, max HP, max physical defense with leftovers doesn't get too KO'd by the Life Orb kind of standard Marshadow. And Scald, Earthquake, Recover, Protect give me some pretty decent options for damage output against this team. So this is just a physical wall. That's pretty much all it's trying to accomplish in this game. Just kind of pivot around and force my opponent to kind of switch back and forth. Next set, Nebula, Magearna. This is my win con, or my best win con, I think. Just a Life Orb Shift Gear, and then Bolt Beam and Gleam for coverage. I think this hits his whole team super effectively. It's not too hard to hit. You know, Bolt Beam, you know, tends to hit most things super effectively. Actually, I don't hit Scizor super effectively, but Scizor's best bet against me, I suppose, is something like Bullet Punch or like a close combat superpower type thing. Which none of those kill me, and Thunderbolt is a 2-8 KO on most Scizor variants, especially if I get like a +1 boost. I think he's in a lot of trouble. I had Hidden Power Fire over Dazzling Gleam for a while, but I really wanted to be able to knock out Marshadow. I wanted to remove that threat if I possibly could, and this set should survive, you know, depending on my HP and how many Life Orb hits I've taken, it should survive most Marshadow attacks. Up until I'm about at like 70%, I think, where close combat starts, you know, adamant Life Orb close combat starts to be a threat. So if I get a couple of kills, maybe Marshadow can come in and revenge, but if I've gotten a couple kills with Magearna, that feels good. I've kind of blown a hole through my opponent. Next set, I am Krook. This is my Choppleberry, Intimidate, Stealth Rock, Crocodile. So this set was really hard to build. I had Stone Edge for a while. I was going with Choice Scarf for a while. I mean, one thing about the Cardinals team here is that outside of Thundurus and Marshadow, it is really slow. So Crook is faster than everything on his team outside of Marshadow and Thundurus. So Scarf kind of felt like it guaranteed me an outspeed on turn 1. And I keep wanting to bring Scarf Rocks, but I keep not doing it. It's scary to get locked into Scarf Stealth Rock, especially against an opponent who can, you know, switch in Thundurus and Nasty Plot up, and then my whole team's in a bit of trouble. So I ended up going away from that. I stuck with the Choppleberry. This survives Marshadow's close combat. It survives Thundurus, Modest, Fight Z from full. that was kind of the initial design behind the set with the 84 HP and a little bit of drop in attack. I ended up removing Stone Edge, which is what I kind of had there for damage, just to get Toxic on. I really didn't like the Hippowdon lead, and I wanted to be able to get damage on that for my subsequent mons. Specifically Ho-Oh, but also Magearna, who could do a lot of damage to Hippowdon, but couldn't quite Oko it. Earthquake and Knockoff, fairly standard stab combination. Knockoff is nice to remove items off of, you know, whatever's switching in. Choice Scarfs. I mean, really, it's just Choice Scarfs that I'm trying to get rid of quite desperately. So a Choice Scarf on Marshadow, who could potentially switch in on me because it only takes a neutral from Dark, and I think it only takes neutral from, no, it resists. I always forget, so I always get confused. I know Pheromosa resists ground, and I always forget why, whether it's bug or fighting. I think bug resists ground. The Marshadow doesn't resist ground. Good, glad we had that talk. But Earthquake is kind of my most spammable attack. Hits Nidoking really hard. I could see a lead situation with Croak versus Nidoking, and this set lives everything from a Scarf Nidoking, and it kills anything that's not scarfed. You know, barring like a Sugar Berry or something like that with Earthquake. The next mon on the team is Rocket the Crobat. Brave Bird, U-turn, Defog, Roost. I gotta fit Defog on the team somewhere if I'm running Ho-Oh. It's just so much of a liability. Brave Bird, and we'll get to this with Ho-Oh, he doesn't have a real flying resist. Thundurus resists flying, sure. Thundurus isn't very bulky. We'll get to some of the calcs with Ho-Oh later, but flying attacks are pretty free against this team. Fly-Z, Brave Bird kills a lot on his team, does a lot of damage to other Pokemon. U-turns for momentum. Roost just to kind of keep me healthy if I need to defog multiple times in a game. And then Infiltrator to prevent like a sub bulk up Marshadow from doing a lot of work. This set is guaranteed outspeed, Jolly, max speed, Marshadow. So basically this comes in and revenges Marshadow pretty much exclusively. And I don't think there's any... A Koba Berry Marshadow I guess could survive, but other than that, I don't think there's any set that Marshadow has, Focus Sash obviously, that can take the Brave Bird from Crobat, and the Fly-Z that is just there for extra damage. My next set is Gamora the Suicune. This is standard Vincoon, aside from the EV investment. So Scald, Calm Mind, Substitute Protect. After a Calm Mind, a Volcanion cannot break my sub with basically any attack. It's really close. Some of the modest attacks are rolls. So this basically can stall out Volcanion to some degree between Substitute, Protect, Calm Mind, and just Recovery. So I have to pressure stall Volcanion, which is a bit unfortunate. But if I get set up, I can do a lot of damage to the rest of his team. And Marshadow can't come in and steal my boost, but it has to risk essentially a Scald Burn at that point. So in some ways it's bait for Marshadow Volcanion, who generally would be pretty comfortable switching in on this. Mostly Volcanion. If I can get a sub up against Volcanion and then a Calm Mind in whatever order, it's going to be very, very difficult for Volcanion to do anything to me. And then once I get set up, Marshadow can steal my boost, but it risks a Scald Burn, and if it does anything else, it's going to die to, you know, plus whatever Scald that I end up at. The rest of the coverage does a lot to his whole team. The rest of the coverage, I mean, Scald does a lot to his whole team generally. Not anything on his team doesn't really want to get burned because of the passive damage or just because of the general damage output. So kind of an interesting bring. You know, I'm going with double Water Wall here, but it's nice to have a backup check to Marshadow. This really bulky 252 HP, 28 defense bold set takes... I don't think it gets 3-8 KO'd by... it doesn't get 2-8 KO'd by anything that Marshadow can do. Sort of like Banded something or rather. I think Banded CC probably does. But other than that, it can take hits and kind of pivot around and just gives me a way to do some damage and potentially get some burns on some of his Pokemon. Then we have Ho-Oh Star-Lord here, and this is my main win condition going into the game. The coverage here on a Choice Banded set is Brave Bird, Sacred Fire, Flame Charge, Toxic. A couple interesting things to note: Toxic and Flame Charge on a Banded set. If Marshadow is not Scarfed, then Flame Charge into Flame Charge will knock it out. and if it gets weakened, it's kind of nice to have a backup means to get damage off. And so Flame Charge gives me a way to kind of boost and continue to do damage, and with the Choice Band it puts out a lot of damage. Toxic is a way to, you know, if I have to switch in on Hippowdon and I'm still really high on health, I don't want to take a ton of recoil, I can just get the Toxic off. Probably has rock coverage, but Hippowdon's offensive capabilities aren't amazing, so most of the time I can take some hits, even with my limited investment from Hippowdon. And then Sacred Fire Oko's Thunderous, which is nice. It also has a chance to burn on the rest of his team. Just does a ton of damage. Realistically, none of those moves matter. The move that matters is Brave Bird. Banded Brave Bird is a 2-hit KO on everything. There isn't a Pokemon on his team that he can switch in that doesn't die to 2 Brave Birds. There isn't one. And as we talked about earlier, his speed tiers are such that I don't need to invest a ton of speed to outspeed his whole team, barring Scarf Pokemon. So 297, so 216 Jolly on Ho-Oh outspeeds his entire team, outside of Marshadow and Thundurus. Thundurus dies to Sacred Fire, Thundurus dies to 2 Flame Charges, Marshadow dies to 2 Flame Charges. He doesn't have switch-ins to this, so basically every time Ho-Oh gets in, barring it against, you know, Marshadow already in or Thundurus already in, it's going to get a kill. It's going to take a lot of recoil, but that's why we've got Regenerator. We just kind of, the plan behind this is we switch in with Ho-Oh, either on a U-turn or on a double or anything like that, and we click Brave Bird and we claim 1. It's going to get a kill. And the hope is that through Regenerator and Brave Bird, I can basically keep pivoting this in and getting a kill every time it pivots in. And so I'm hoping Ho-Oh has a really good game here. I also considered, you know, Flame Charge weakness policy. Some week it's going to work. I'm really excited that it might work some week. This wasn't the week. It was going to be either Banded or weakness policy. Weakness policy is just hard to activate a majority of the time. So I stuck with the Banded set, and I'm thinking it'll do a lot of work. That's the team. See you guys in the battle. And first thing, looking at his team, he did not bring Altaria or Scizor. Instead, he brought Goodra, which, you know, is a logical bring, and then Wartortle. And I completely forgot everything that Wartortle will do. Okay, I knew it was Eviolite. That's what I knew. That's about it going into it. So looking at his team, looking at my team, my lead was pretty much always going to be Crocodile. Getting rocks up against his team is really good. He has removal in Wartortle with Rapid Spin and Defog on Thundurus. Neither one is great. They're not great. They don't threaten Crocodile, aside from like Thundurus using like a Fight Z, and Wartortle's damage output is going to be pretty minimal. Scald Burns are annoying, but I can more or less keep rocks up. And then rocks are going to help me chip away at his team. His team's actually not that weak to rocks. But I really wanted to get him up just to kind of chip away at everything. It helps with some of the calcs for Magearna and Ho-Oh, just doing that little bit more damage. So I was going to lead Crocodile. If he led Hippowdon, I was probably going to lead off with a Toxic. Just wanted to start chipping that thing down. Nidoking, we've got a game plan for it. Doesn't kill us if it's Scarf, and if it's not Scarf, we just kill it with Earthquake. Thundurus, we survive Fight Z, and we can get up our rocks, or just fire off a Toxic. So Crocodile was always going to be my lead. Throw out Crocodile, my opponent leaves Hippowdon, so like we said, we've got it intimidated. We're just going to get up Toxic. Just hopefully hit that and just start weakening this down. So turn 1, I Toxic, my opponent Stealth Rocks. Makes sense. I think you see Ho-Oh on the other side, you get up Stealth Rocks. I could have run Taunt or something on this set, and I considered it very briefly, but it's too risky against a lot of his team. So I ended up just going with Toxic. Got the Toxic off. At this point, my opponent switches into Wartortle, whereas I get my Stealth Rocks up. This is a good switch. He gets in a potential Rapid Swimmer. I don't know, Wartortle might be fast. So he gets in his Rapid Spinner. I get my Stealth Rocks up. And at this point, I'm not switching out because I don't want him to Rapid Spin my rocks away for free. I'm just going to knock off, try and take out that Eviolite. So get the knockoff off, Eviolite's removed, my opponent goes for his own Toxic, which is fair. It guarantees some damage on Crocodile, prevents me from doing some shenanigans later in the game. Looking at it, Crocodile's a pretty decent threat to his team, If I happen to be Scarf or something like that, Toxic covers any sort of switches that I might do, aside from Magearna and Crobat, I suppose, but I don't think Magearna or Crobat are necessarily switching in here. It covers the switch to my 2 water types, which would wall Wartortle. Everything walls Wartortle, I'm fairly confident. That's fully evolved. So Toxic makes sense, chipping me away. I get up my rocks, and at this point, with sand damage, he's in range of Earthquake, and I don't want him removing my rocks for free, so I'm going to go for Earthquake and just prevent Rapid Spin. If he switched into Thundurus or something there, it's really, really bad for me, obviously, but I guess that's kind of a play that I had to make. I could have double knocked or something like that, which I guess would potentially punish the Thundurus switch in or switch to any of his other Pokemon. But after I get this damage off, he ends up going out to Thundurus, and I think during this turn, I'd watched Orizan's last battle, and I thought he might actually lead with Thundurus because he had done a Thundurus lead to kind of counter rocks and just went with a Fight Z, and it put him in a really good spot. So I was basically working off the assumption that this was Fight Z, and it's a pretty standard set, and I just didn't have great switch-ins to Thundurus in general. So this is probably where I felt the least comfortable. It's this moment or another moment I felt the least comfortable in this game. If he wasn't very heavily invested, I could take this pretty well. I might survive, is what I mean by taking it pretty well. If he was like a bulky set or something like that, or was not max special attack, or was timid, a bunch of different things. He ends up firing off the Z and it kills me, and I'm kind of okay with this. It sucks to lose Crook, but I didn't think I had another play, so I could potentially have switched into Quag, but I really didn't want Quag to take damage unless I had to have Quag take damage because it was my best answer to any sort of setup Marshadow. I didn't want to throw away Suicune. I didn't want to take any unnecessary damage on Ho-Oh or Crobat with rocks and whatever attack he went for. And Magearna was kind of my win con, so I didn't want to go to that. But after losing Crocodile, at this point, it's really, really hard to go into anything, really. Crobat, Ho-Oh, both are in terrible positions. Crobat can't threaten Thundurus with damage, basically. Quagsire, in theory, is a good answer here, but it takes damage, and if Thundurus is something crazy like HP Grass or something like that, I could just die, and if that happens, I think the floodgates open and I get swept. So I felt like my only real answer here was Magearna, and so that's what I ended up going out into. It kind of sucks because, again, this is my win con. I didn't want it to take damage, and Thunderbolt's going to do a pretty decent amount to me. Once I got Magearna in, Ice Beam hits his entire team pretty comfortably. Marshadow doesn't take a ton from it, but it doesn't want to take that damage. And then super effective on the rest of his team. So I'm just going to fire off the Ice Beam. I think after being in that awkward position with Crocodile, I've realized Thundurus is a huge, huge threat to me. My best answer to it is Crocodile. You know, Quagsire potentially is a really good answer, but I'm physically defensive, not specially defensive, so it's going to do a lot of damage. So I'm firing off Ice Beam here. I want to remove the threat. Worst case scenario, it has to pivot out. It comes back in at 50%, and I can kind of deal with that. So fire off Ice Beam. My opponent actually goes with Thunder Wave, which is a really interesting tech. I do break through. So if I don't break through the Thunder Wave there, I don't think he can kill me, but he can pivot around for free, and I don't get rid of Thundurus, which would be really bad for me. I did briefly consider Shift Gear here, you know, to cover a potential switch, but it just felt too risky. It could be a sub Thundurus that would, you know, heavily punish that. There's a lot of sets that could really punish me going for anything but Ice Beam there, so I kind of felt like I was locked into that play. Go for Ice Beam, get my Soul Heart boost. My opponent goes to Nidoking. At this point, Nidoking, if it is Scarf, I think I have a chance to live Earth Power. Can double check that really quick, because I think that's a pretty important calc. So Earth Power kills if he's Timid Life Orb, but if he's Scarfed, 84 min. So yeah, I guess there's like an absolute min roll that I live Earth Power. I also did have 2 flying types that I could switch in potentially, and so I think Earth Power was really the only play for my opponent, but I didn't want to risk switching in any of my other mons here. Suicune was potentially a switch in, but I didn't want to take damage. There's a bunch of attacks that can go for Earth Power, special defense drop, and suddenly I'm in a losing position. So kind of similar to the Crocodile position that I was in just previously with Thundurus, I was in another really bad position with Nidoking. I ended up staying in and just making sure that I didn't throw the match by switching to something else. Fire off an Ice Beam, Earth Power kills me, probably Life Orb, Sheer Force, something or other. So Crobat comes in here, and this was a really sketchy turn. I think this was actually kind of the pivotal turn in the match. So I calced FlyZ, and FlyZ did 98 to uninvested min. If he had investment, he could kill me with Ice Beam very easily. If he was Choice Scarfed, I was safe. So seeing Earth Power kind of made me think that he can't outspeed me. And at this point, FlyZ does pick up a kill, provided FlyZ and the Brave Bird picks up a kill on anything, provided he wasn't a bulky Nidoking. So if Nidoking had some bulk here and it could take this FlyZ, and then fire off an Ice Beam, again, I'd be in trouble once again. But FlyZ was kind of my play here. It picked up the KO on Nidoking, which helped. I mean, if it's Scarf, he's going to switch and he's going to lose something else, and I can get a defog off pretty reliably. So if I have to FlyZ, fortunately for me, Nidoking isn't HP or bulk invested, and it does die. If you were HP or bulk invested, Orizan, let me know, because that roll was huge right there. He brings out Marshadow. This screams I'm Choice Scarfed. It absolutely screams I'm Choice Scarfed. Crobat just showed FlyZ. Crobat is faster than Marshadow. Marshadow comes out. So against Choice Scarf, I feel pretty confident with Quagsire. His bulk is such that Adamant Life Orb is not always a 2-hit KO. So I know this isn't going to be a 2-hit KO. I can just stall him out. He goes for Ice Punch. I was expecting Rock Tomb. Rock Tomb is really hard for my team to deal with because it gets a Technician boost. It's 90 base power, and it smashes Crobat. It smashes Ho-Oh. I think I die through Chardy Berry a lot of times, especially after Rocks. After Rocks, I think there's no way I survive Rock Tomb. Like max Chardy Berry, I think I die. So Ice Punch was interesting. It also didn't cover a Suicune switch. So I guess it was, so at this point it kind of gave me a little bit of information that was his best bet to hit Crobat. So no Rock Tomb, which again is really nice for my team. The Ice Punch does 20%. At this point I can either recover if I think he's just going to keep spamming this, or I can just go for damage. What do I fire off here? I think I just throw off an Earthquake. No, I recover. So I recover just to make sure that I'm staying healthy enough to switch in on Marshadow again. He goes Gudra and hits with the Power Whip. Luckily, the max HP, max defense, quad effective attacks mean nothing to Quagsire. So I get some Earthquake damage off, which is important because it puts it in range of Ho-Oh's Brave Bird, a bunch of other attacks. And here, my opponent goes for Dragon Tail, and unfortunately for me, brings in Ho-Oh. So this is what I think it was last week. It was Matt and the Dead Sea Silvally were trying to do to me. They were using Whirlwind on Skarmory to try and bring in Ho-Oh on the Stealth Rocks they set up. So Orizan wakes a little bit later in the game. The odds are a little bit better for him. He's got a 33% chance and it hits. So losing 50% here, fortunately, always EV your Pokemon such that you minimize Rocks damage and you can take 2 switch-ins on Rocks. Fortunately, Ho-Oh comes in. Ho-Oh can pick up the kill here with anything. I end up going for... So I don't want to take Recoil from Brave Bird, because I think the damage could matter later. So I end up just going for Flame Charge here, which I think is kind of a choke, because it allows my opponent to... So I go for Flame Charge. Flame Charge picks up the KO. I calced Earthquake damage and on Quagsire to figure out that it was defense invested, but not heavily enough that Flame Charge didn't kill. From my banded Ho-Oh. So I pick up the kill there. He's gooey, drops my speed. I get my speed back. So that's kind of funny. That would have been a really good tech if I had brought like a weakness policy. He would have been able to stop me in my tracks. So that was kind of unfortunate for me though, because hitting Flame Charge allows him to go Hippowdon more safely. If I did Brave Bird and he went Hippowdon, I'd probably just end up sacking Ho-Oh in that position, which would have made for a slightly interesting end game. I might have still switched out the Quagsire. I don't know. I'd have to think about it a little bit more. So just going the Quagsire here to stall out some turns, rack up some toxic damage. He goes for Rock Slide to hit Ho-Oh. Does nothing to Quagsire. Next turn here, I protect to stall out a little bit more toxic damage, which, you know, that does. He goes for Earthquake, which is a safer play. That kills me and doesn't risk missing. I could go for a double protect here. I end up going for, I think, Scald, just in case he pivoted out to Marshadow or something like that, because I saw that my win condition at this point was get Crobat in, remove rocks. Ho-Oh takes anything short, anything from Marshadow, unless he was hiding the Rock Tomb tech, which would have been really cool play. But knowing that he showed Ice Beam, I assumed that he wasn't Rock Tomb. And so going to Crobat, I can defog the rocks away. Hippowdon is toxic, so it's eventually going to go down to that, and I can just sit here and defog. I did forget about one thing, though, and that's if there's no target for defog to hit. It's essentially Suicide Rocks. I don't clear rocks, and Orizan remembered this, and so he's just spamming rocks. And at first I'm like, well, this isn't going to work out for you, you're toxic. And until I realized that it does. So I think after the first one, I was like, okay, what are you doing? Oh, you're going to die to toxic. And defog's not going to have a target, so the rocks are going to be up. And if the rocks are up, Ho-Oh can't take an attack from Marshadow. Suicune 1v1 versus Marshadow is interesting. There's a lot of theory that goes into that. The max that Spectral Thief was going to do was 37, and my opponent basically had to lock into that in order to kill Crobat and Ho-Oh. So that would have been interesting. I fire off defog one more time in case he wants to attack here. Orizan doesn't, he's just spamming rocks. And so at this point, again, assuming that he's just Ice Punch and not Rock Tomb, I go ahead and get the defog off, or the Roost off. This puts me out of range of everything that Marshadow can go for, aside from Rock Tomb. And yeah, rocks stay up, but Hippowdon dies to Toxic, and now I'm at enough health to tank an attack from Marshadow. And I know Brave Bird kills. So he goes for Spectral Thief, it's the only move he can lock into. The 64, which is a lot, but I fire off the Brave Bird, pick up the KO. I do die to Recoil, which, yeah, that's unfortunate. It makes it a 2-0 instead of a 3-0, but it was a really good game, and it was really close. The end positioning was super tight. It was one of those ones where if I made a bad switch kind of in those Nidoking Thundurus periods of time, I just get blown out. And towards the end game, if I make a bad pivot, I don't have the resources left to kind of break through his team. So I think Orizan played really, really well. I to be honest, I think Orizan had a tough matchup. Thundurus and Marshadow are good against my team to some degree, but they do have some trouble as well. I have a lot of flying Pokemon. Crobat is really, really tough for Marshadow to deal with. It almost forces Scarf, otherwise Marshadow just always gets revenged. And Thundurus against a banded Brave Bird from Ho-Oh with Rocks Up is not a switch in. So I think Orizan played really well. War Total was fun to see. I'm curious what the rest of the set was, so Orizan, if you got that, let me know. But this got us qualified for playoffs, which is really exciting. We ended up also having another team drop out, basically, so I got a forfeit win, so I didn't need to win this for playoffs, but it's nice to qualify kind of on my own merits to some degree. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the last couple weeks and then playoffs. Thanks for watching. See you guys around.